Hello and welcome to Foreign Dispatches. It's that time of the week where we take a trip around the world in 25 minutes. I'm Teniola Shoboale. On the program this week, Myanmar's security forces continue crackdown on anti-coup protesters. Plus, amid safety concerns, EU medicines regulator insists Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine is safe for use. More than a month after the Myanmar military staged a coup against the country's democratically elected leader, security forces are continuing an increasingly brutal crackdown on protesters. As the death toll rises, citizens are fleeing into neighboring India.
A medical student who will now never graduate. The 17-year-old is one of the latest protesters to lose his life in a brutal crackdown on anti-coup protesters in Myanmar. Friends and family sang revolutionary songs as they paid their final respects. Count Nyahain lost his life on the outskirts of the capital, Yangon, on Sunday, March 14th, now the bloodiest day of the protests since the February 1st military coup against elected leader Aung San Suu Kyi. Security forces shot dead at least 20 people on Monday after 74 were killed a day earlier, many in the Yangon suburb where Chinese financed factories were torched. The Chinese embassy said many Chinese staff were injured and trapped in arson attacks by unidentified assailants and called on Myanmar to protect Chinese property and citizens. China is viewed as being supportive of the military junta that has taken over power. Now, some of those that don't support the military government and its increasingly brutal crackdown are fleeing into neighboring India. Among them is Kaur, a fireman who said he and 20 others joined the protesters after refusing police orders.
On February 18th, we received an order from the military that the fire truck, which is red in color, had to be painted white, which is the color of the police. The fire truck was supposed to be used for crowd dispersal. On that particular day, on February 18th, I was the commander and I went to disperse the crowd, but I did not fulfill my orders. We did not want to be under the control of the military, so we joined the civil disobedience movement.
He is now in India's Mizoram state, where police defectors also say they refuse to shoot civilians. According to an Indian police officer in Mizoram, more than 400 people from Myanmar, many of them policemen, have fled there since late February. Meanwhile, amid continuing international condemnation, the United Nations has called on the Myanmar military to stop killing and detaining protesters.
The death toll has soared over the past week in Myanmar, where security forces have been using lethal force increasingly aggressively against peaceful protesters, and they continue to arbitrarily arrest and detain people throughout the country. Deeply distressing reports of torture in custody have also emerged. Hundreds of people who have been unlawfully detained remain unaccounted for and have not been acknowledged by the military authorities, and this amounts to enforced disappearances.
Around 140 people have died so far and thousands detained in Myanmar since the February 1st military coup. Protesters continue to take to the streets in defiance of the authorities who have used rubber bullets, tear gas and live ammunition to stop them. 6 districts in Yangon are now under martial law as a result of Sunday's violence, which means that anyone arrested there faces trial in a military tribunal rather than a civilian court. Sentences range from 3 years hard labor to execution.
Away from the situation in Myanmar, this week several countries, mostly in Europe, suspended the use of the Oxford AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine over fears it may have caused some recipients to develop blood clots. The measures came despite assurances from the British-Swedish company, EU medicines regulator and the World Health Organization that the jab is safe for use.
More than a dozen countries have suspended the use of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine Austria was first, pausing the use of a batch of the vaccine on March the 7th while investigating a death. Days later, Denmark stopped administering the shot altogether after a 60-year-old woman died of a blood clot after receiving the jab. Then Norway announced it was also suspending AstraZeneca over reports of possible serious side effects, including bleeding, blood clots, and a low blood platelet count. Iceland, Bulgaria, Ireland, and the Netherlands later said they were halting rollouts, followed by Germany, France, Italy, and Spain, Sweden, and Latvia. Outside Europe, Indonesia and the Democratic Republic of Congo also stopped the rollout. Despite all of this, the World Health Organization says there's no need to panic.
2.6 million people have died, at least 2.6 million people have died of COVID-19 disease. And so far, of the 300 million doses that have been given to people across the world, of course using different vaccines, there is no documented death that's been linked to a COVID vaccine. So I think that while we need to continue to be very closely monitoring this, we do not want people to panic, and we would, for the time being, recommend that countries continue vaccinating with AstraZeneca.
Europe's medicine regulator also says it has full confidence in the vaccine watchdog and the benefits continue to outweigh the risk.
So while the investigation is ongoing, we are still firmly convinced that the benefits of the AstraZeneca vaccine in preventing COVID-19 with its associated risk of hospitalization and death outweigh the risk of these side effects. I want to also stress that at present there is no indication that vaccination has caused these conditions. They have not come up in the clinical trials and they're not listed as known or expected side events with this vaccine. In clinical trials, both the vaccinated people and the people who received the placebo have shown some very small numbers of blood clot developments. The number of thromboembolic events overall in the vaccinated people seems not to be higher than that seen in the general population.
More than 17 million people have received the vaccine in the United Kingdom and the European Union to date, with fewer than 40 cases of blood clots as reported of last week.
As global health experts came under increasing pressure to clear up questions over the safety of the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine, a number of countries opted to stick with the vaccine despite concerns.
Despite a number of European nations suspending the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine use amid concerns over safety, Thailand launched an inoculation campaign with AstraZeneca's COVID-19 shot, with the Prime Minister first in line on Tuesday. Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha and other cabinet members had initially been due to get their vaccine shots last week, but Thailand temporarily suspended the use of the vaccine amid reports from Europe that it could cause dangerous blood clots. On Sunday, AstraZeneca said it reviewed data from more than 17 million people vaccinated in the United Kingdom and the European Union and found 37 cases of blood clots. It said none of these cases was proven to have been caused by the vaccine and that the incidence of clots was much lower than would be expected to occur naturally in the general population of a size and was similar to that of other licensed COVID-19 vaccines. The World Health Organization and the EU's European Medicine Agency backed that assessment, prompting Thailand to announce it would begin using the AstraZeneca vaccine. Similarly, Australia says it has no plans to stop administering the jab.
Here in Australia, safety is our first priority, and in any large vaccine rollout we do expect to see unusual events, and we monitor very closely and carefully for those. But this does not mean that an event that happens after vaccination has been given is indeed due to that vaccine. So we do always take it seriously, we do investigate, but in this situation I can absolutely say that I remain confident in the AstraZeneca vaccine, that it's safe, and that there is, at this point, no evidence that it causes blood clots. No evidence that it causes blood clots.
Belgium also voiced support, saying it will continue with the vaccine rollout. One expert says he believes herd mentality offers a partial explanation for the increasing number of countries opting to suspend their rollouts of that particular vaccine.
What we're seeing is a bit of a herd effect across the European nations, a herd effect. I wouldn't want to call it panic, but one country said, "Oh, we've got some side effects in Norway. Are they or are they not related to the vaccine?" And then other countries have sort of, "Oh, we better take action." So I come back to my point. This is an area which has to be dealt with by people expert in assessing these types of data. And there has to be high trust between the politicians, the scientists, and the medics who are involved in assessing these issues.
The UK, which has doled out 11 million doses of the AstraZeneca jab, and Canada, which approved the vaccine in February, also say they plan to stick with the jab. The AstraZeneca product is just one of several vaccines being deployed across the country to fight the coronavirus pandemic, but it is still a key pillar of a United Nations-backed project known as COVAX that aims to supply COVID-19 vaccines fairly around the world. The program began shipments in late February and has plans to ship more than 200 million doses by the end of May, nearly all of them versions of the AstraZeneca vaccine.
Ahead of this year's Ramadan, the UAE government has rolled out its COVID-19 guidelines to Muslim faithful and other residents to curb any further spread of the virus. This comes as it achieves a 50% population vaccination weeks ahead of its initial target date. All public celebrations during the fast have been cancelled for the second year running as UAE fights its second wave. Our correspondent, Mayowa Adegoke, has more on this.
Half of the United Arab Emirates population has gotten at least a first COVID-19 jab, a feat the government initially set out to achieve by the end of March. It's 2 weeks before the target date, and 52.46% of residents, which includes 70% of the elderly and those considered high risk, have now been vaccinated against coronavirus, according to health authorities. But the fight against the still raging pandemic, now in its second wave, is far from over. Over 2,000 new infections are recorded daily, a reality that has led government to place restrictions on the coming Ramadan festivities.
We can't get as many people in the house as we used to. So the traditional first day of Ramadan banquet in my house had to be put on hold. We would sometimes Zoom and eat together via Zoom, but it doesn't feel the same. So because of the restrictions on the number of people in the house, obviously we understand how important they are, but it has affected that spirit of togetherness of Ramadan. The other thing is the prayer in the mosque after iftar, because obviously mosques used to be full of worshippers at that time. The regulations on mosque capacity has affected that. The good news is that this Ramadan, mosques will be open, so people will start going again. Last Ramadan, mosques were closed for any gatherings. So there is hopefully light at the end of the tunnel. We can still go to the mosque and do the prayer after iftar, maybe not in the same numbers, but it's doable this year, which is amazing.
In addition to the ban on family and public gatherings, the new guidelines do not permit residents to perform acts of charity except through food banks and other approved means. In the last 10 days of Ramadan, which begins on the 13th or 14th of April, government says it will reassess the situation to possibly relax the rules.
As I explained, when it comes to prayers, instead of mosques, many people now do it in the family home. So parents with their children, and they would pray at home. The charity work has been done via food banks and official charities. So we know that the people who cannot afford it, still have food on the table, which is very important. When it comes to maybe the thing that we can't still do is getting people together in one house and doing iftar together. Again, Zoom has allowed us to watch each other eat, but it's not the spirit of sharing food and putting food on the table for everyone.
In the meantime, government's free vaccination continues till the entire UAE population is immunized against the virus. From Dubai in the United Arab Emirates, Mayowa Adegoke for Channels Television News.
As economies around the world look to open up again, it's mixed reactions to the proposal of vaccine passports. More on that in a moment. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us on Foreign Dispatches. This week, New Yorkers marked 1 year since their city's first known fatality from COVID-19 with an evening memorial that honored the 30,000 residents who perished over the past year from the pandemic.
The faces of some of New York's pandemic victims projected onto the Brooklyn Bridge during a music-filled memorial marking 1 year since the city's first COVID-19 fatality. New York City was the U.S. epicenter of the pandemic in its early days. The city was under weeks-long lockdowns to control the virus' fast spread, with scores of residents at least temporarily fleeing the United States' most populous city. Various performers playing amid candles with the Brooklyn Bridge, the backdrop onto which are projected images of some of the 30,000 people in the city who died of the pandemic over the past year.
Every morning, the first thing I see is a list, and there are numbers on it. But what it really means is how many people we lost, how many New Yorkers are gone, how many neighbors, how many members of our family. Today, that number is more than 30,000. It's a number we can barely imagine. More New Yorkers lost than in World War II, Vietnam, Hurricane Sandy, and 9/11 put together. Every family touched in some way, and for so many families, a pain that is raw.
1 year ago this month, the U.S. government was racing to build hundreds of makeshift hospitals near New York and other major cities as healthcare systems across the country were pushed to capacity, sometimes beyond, by the coronavirus pandemic. Even as millions of Americans hunkered down in their homes under strict stay-at-home orders, the death toll kept rising. Nearly half of the new U.S. fatalities in March 2020 were in New York State, despite closed businesses and deserted streets. There was no public seating area for Sunday's memorial, and residents were encouraged by the mayor's office to watch the event online.
Green Pass is the term used in Israel for a digital or paper document to prove they have been vaccinated against the coronavirus. Now the EU has proposed the same to allow people to travel for work or tourism throughout the region. But not everyone is open to the initiative, and the World Health Organization says countries need to be cautious.
As vaccines are globally being rolled out, a few countries, including Bahrain, China and Israel, have already introduced schemes identifying vaccinated people. Now, under pressure from tourism-dependent countries, the European Commission has agreed to develop its own vaccine passports. The digital Green Pass will combine information on vaccination, details of any coronavirus tests and recoveries, even in case the person was ill with the virus at some point. For the hospitality sector, the green passport and return of tourism would be vital to battle the economic crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic.
A COVID-19 health pass would allow us to travel, to get back a little bit of freedom. I support it.
But not everyone is welcoming of the scheme due to concerns about data privacy.
About the vaccination passports, there is more at stake than just business. There is also the issue of privacy, so it's a bit difficult.
Some spinners also say they find the scheme discriminatory.
There are many of us who don't want to get vaccinated because we don't trust these vaccines. But I also don't have to be locked in my house and be discriminated. It's unfair.
The World Health Organization has urged countries to be exceptionally careful regarding vaccination certification, as vaccines are still inequitably accessible in the world.
With regard to what a certification of vaccination can allow you to do, that is at national level or international level, and the use of a certification of vaccination which allows you to travel or allows you to carry out certain activities like attend a restaurant or go to school or attend university. We have to be exceptionally careful, because right now we're dealing with a tremendously inequitous situation in the world where the likelihood of you being offered or getting a vaccine is very much to do with the country you live in, very much to do with the level of wealth, the level of influence that you or your government has on global markets. The Emergency Committee of WHO have made it clear in their recommendations to the Director General that at this time, at the present time, the requirement for certification of vaccination as a requirement for international travel is not justified, as vaccination is not widely enough available and is inequitably distributed throughout the world.
There's also a debate among EU member nations, with some arguing it may be premature to issue such passports, as it's unclear how much protection vaccines give against transmission. In addition, the EU's slow rollout of COVID-19 vaccines has been widely criticized, with only about 5% of people inoculated so far, and the bloc's target of inoculating 70% of its adult population by the end of the summer seem to be increasingly in question.
Well, in Greece, where the tourism sector accounts for about a fifth of the country's economy, officials are already laying out the sunbeds and beach umbrellas as it prepares to reopen to tourists in May and resurrect an industry which suffered one of its worst years in decades because of the coronavirus pandemic.
Greece is relying on its record in handling the pandemic to draw foreign tourists back to its islands and monuments. It led calls for Europe to adopt a common digital pass showing whether someone has been vaccinated to allow travel over the summer.
We're hoping that other countries can follow suit, and we can have a common digital process which will facilitate and remove the difficulty barriers. It's not just the barriers, the legal barriers or the bans, but after that it's also the difficulties that people face, the hurdles in order to travel.
Greece's tourism minister says the country would open to visitors either way.
People that are vaccinated, tested negative, or recovered from the disease, or they have antibodies, are welcome to Greece. And we will welcome them irrespective of any agreements or not.
In 2020, the worst year on record for global tourism, according to the UN World Tourism Organization, just 7.4 million people traveled to Greece, fewer than any time during its decade-long economic crisis and down from a record 31.3 million the year before. Revenues plunged to 4 billion euros in 2020 from 18 billion in 2019 as the economy shrank by more than 8%, adding pressure on a budget already creaking under one of the world's heaviest debt burdens. The number of British and German tourists was down 70% and 62% respectively.
We will have a better year than last year. I think that's clear in my mind. It's clear because of the kind of work and systematic work we've done. It's clear because we've shown the required leadership to push everybody else in that respect.
Greece, with a population of 11 million, has recorded about 7,000 deaths and is again in lockdown after a surge in new cases squeezed a health system battered by the economic crises. Residents of several Greek islands have been vaccinated, and Greece plans to vaccinate all tourism workers by summer after vulnerable groups. Those not vaccinated will be tested at least once a week.
This is where we say goodbye till next time. Remember, our top stories are never far away. You can catch them on channelstv.com. You can also leave your comments and suggestions on the social media addresses showing on your screen. Thank you so much for watching the program. I'm Teniola Shoboale. Stay safe.